hoping to be kind of picked up by these mics here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
That's good. I usually say I shout too loudly. So can I just first of all say how very grateful Felbeck Trust is to the whole church community for being so welcoming and open to this kind of event. I think as the evening goes on, it will be pretty clear that we've got an awful lot of things in common. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers in due course. But first of all, a big welcome to you, really, because without your support and commitment, our venture would be worse for it. So thank you for coming tonight and for hopefully being part of an evening's conversation about wildlife conservation, climate and the church, and doubtless plenty of other topics as well. There'll be plenty of opportunity to contribute to the conversation during the questions and answers session at the end, and Nick might go off-piste during the course of the conversation.
I'm not to be trusted, Trevor.
Excellent. We will see. So our roving mics will get to you at any point during the course of the evening. So Felbeck Trust was registered as a wildlife charity in 2016. Our origins go back to a small group of friends looking after the local village pond, and since then we've grown. And we now own or manage over a dozen small nature reserves across North Norfolk, from North Walsham to Fakenham. Each an oasis for wildlife in an otherwise intensive agricultural or urban landscape. Our USP, our unique selling point, is that we rescue small abandoned sites and restore them for the benefit of nature and the education and enjoyment of visitors. Illustrative of this approach is Sussex Common, which is our kind of go-to spot for demonstrating the kind of things that we get up to. It's a cluster of sites which over the past 8 years we have taken from neglect to recognition as a county wildlife site. We rely entirely on donations and grants to fund our work. Fundraising events like this evening are our main means of covering core costs, so thank you for your support and your generosity. We hope that some of you, at least this evening, might be on the start of a journey together with us. Over the years, we've also provided advice to other groups and with similar intentions. Cromer Green Spaces, which does great work for wildlife conservation in their seaside town, was an early spin-off of Felbeck Trust, and I'm delighted to see Mark, who is the current chair of Cromer Green Spaces. So we are always interested in working in collaboration with other groups in the fight for nature. For more information about Felbeck Trust, our purpose, people and projects, we've got a small display just outside the door on the right and some leaflets for you to take away. And if you want to know anything in more detail, please approach one of the people from Felbeck Trust tonight. Our lovely volunteers, many of them whom are here tonight, do everything from fundraising, habitat management work, species surveying, youth engagement, publicity and outreach. The charity is run by a board of trustees who provide strategic direction and governance. We're nearly there. Sigh of relief. Someone who has been a keen supporter from the very beginning and done most of the jobs I've just described is Nick Acheson, who we are proud and privileged to have as our patron and ambassador for Felbeck Trust. Nick, thanks, and we don't say thank you enough. Nick, who grew up in North Norfolk, squelching through salt marshes and cycling quiet lanes in search of wildlife, is well known for the breadth of his knowledge of nature and the environment and the wit and ease with which he explains complex ideas. Those skills will be at the fore tonight.
I hope so.
Nick is a wildlife author and accomplished broadcaster. He's appeared on the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, many times on Radio 4. as well as more locally being a regular guest on Radio Norfolk. And he presents films for Norfolk Wildlife Trust, Greenlight Trust and Pensthorpe. It's now my pleasure to invite Nick to introduce Bishop Graham, our guest this evening, and to get the conversation started. Thank you very much.
Trevor, thank you. We won't spend the whole evening thanking one another, but thank you to you all for being here, because as you've heard, Felbeck is a wonderful organisation. It's a small organisation, but mighty nonetheless, that looks after the quiet places, the forgotten places, the neglected places that make up the connective tissue of our wild and beautiful Norfolk. So it's a real pleasure and a privilege to see so many of you here supporting Felbeck Trust this evening, and especially you, Bishop Graham. Thank you very much for being here. The Right Reverend Bishop Graham Usher is both the Bishop of Norwich and also the leader of the Church of England's Environment Programme, and it's in that capacity that he's very generously agreed to speak to us this evening. There's a backstory here, which is that a few months ago I said to Trevor, who is a ball of energy, an indomitable creature, and I said to him, I'd like to do something to support Felbeck this winter. Would you like a talk? And he said, I'd like you to interview the Bishop of Norwich. and I thought, crumbs. How do I acquire a Bishop of Norwich? So I wrote a long, slightly wheedling letter to Bishop Graham, who was gracious and kind and generous enough
You sent me a bribe as well.
I sent you a bribe as well, I did. I sent you a bribe. And you sent one back. And Bishop Graham was kind enough to invite me to visit him in Norwich, where we discussed the idea of an evening together. And we are extremely grateful to Father Howard and to the whole congregation of St Andrew in Holt, but also to you, Bishop Graham, for coming to speak to us this evening. Now, if I may, I will start by quoting yourself to you from your lovely book, The Way Under Our Feet. Now, commercial break at this point. Bishop Graham has brought some of his book with him and will be delighted to sell them at the end and also to sign them for you. There's an offer you cannot possibly refuse, and we're locking the doors until you do anyway. In your book you write, we are in an era that is seeing huge losses in biodiversity, water shortages in some major cities, increasing consumption of the world's precious resources, the erosion, compaction, salinization and pollution of soils, and the deforestation of pristine ecosystems, simply to feed demand and make a profit. Responding to this might require an 11th commandment, thou shalt walk gently on the earth. And that's really our subject for this evening. But before we get into the detail of that, Bishop Graham, you are an ecologist, turned priest, turned bishop. You began your career as someone, as you are still today, passionately committed to nature, its study and its conservation. Would you tell us a little about your journey from ecologist to priest?
Well, good evening. So nice to be here. Thank you for all rocking up. I know you've come really to see Nick, so it's good to be here with you. And so I grew up in a family that was very interested in the outdoors, and kind of had at times a childhood where I was allowed to sort of roam from our village in North Yorkshire, a couple of miles, and you kind of came home when you were hungry, sort of thing. It's fascinating now how children, their roaming distance has shortened so much. And so I'd, be looking for things in the ridge and furrow of the farmland around where I live. Those medieval farming systems were still very much there. Most of them now have been ploughed up or built over, sadly. And the sort of farm ponds, sticklebacks in the dikes and things. So I was always interested in that, and interested in biology at school, and yet also there was this sort of sense of vocational calling to ministry. And I think I first articulated that when I was about 13. And so I went off and did a degree in Edinburgh in ecological science. I kind of started as a forester and then became an ecologist by the end of my undergraduate time. And at that time I was also exploring vocation to ordination. So I was ordained when I was 25, having then gone on to Cambridge to do a theology degree. But I've always felt that it's two vocations, flying when it's at its best, kind of flying in formation. And so I've been privileged when I was a vicar in the northeast of England. I chaired the Forestry Commission for the northeast, and I was on the board of Northumberland National Park. So I've always enjoyed doing things in parallel and felt I've both fed off each other in many ways. So when I was asked to be the lead bishop for the environment, I kind of jumped at it. Justin Welby had already asked me to be the lead bishop for sex, which I declined. You know, that's really the hot potato in the church. And then he asked me, you know, whether I'd be the lead bishop for safeguarding, and you know, that's a really challenging area. Well, I kind of held out because I knew Bishop Nick Acheson, the Bishop of Salisbury, was going to be retiring, and he was the lead bishop for the environment. And so I really sort of kind of slotted into that very happily, doing various things around the Anglican Communion, and now tend to speak on the environment in the House of Lords. So it feels such a joy to have that sort of joint vocation in life, flying in formation.
Thank you, Bishop Graham. When you first mentioned you'd been asked to be the lead bishop for sex, my first thought was, do we have any minors present? And I can comfortably say we do not. Do you, in your daily life, have the time to take joy in nature? Do you get outside and manage to... You have a beautiful garden in Norwich where I've had the privilege of doing an event with Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Do you take time to watch nature and see its daily joys?
Yeah, no, Friday is pretty sacrosanct for Rachel and myself to get out for a walk. We notice it if on our day off on a Friday we've, you know, not either had time with each other, but also to be out, and a woodland landscape is a real joy for us. So you often find us at Horsted Woods or Corston Heath, or, you know, being out and having a good walk. I find that is so helpful in the pattern of my days. But also with this job I have, this vocation, comes this extraordinary privilege of being the current caretaker of, you know, the Bishop of Norwich's garden, which is an incredible garden, 4 acres next to the cathedral, which has been the Bishop's garden for at least 600 years. And to be the current steward of that is a great joy. And when I arrived, we removed all use of chemicals from the garden. And we've also stopped mowing the banks. And to see the return of orchids, to see more bird life, to see more butterflies, has just been such a joy. Sadly, we've virtually lost all our box hedging now because of box moth and the blight, which is the kind of swings and roundabouts of... Well, they were doing an interesting experiment this year. We've cut a lot of the box back to about this high and fed it in the hope that this summer it'll reinvigorate. I saw this trial happening up at a National Trust property near Newcastle, and I thought, we'll have a go at that as well. So we're removing the parts that have got really bad moth and blight and seeing if that might help. But it's the swings and roundabouts with working with nature is, you know, you gain some things and you lose some things. But Norfolk Wildlife Trust very kindly came and did a sort of baseline survey soon after I arrived of what's in the garden. And at some point they'll return. And I'm really excited by how through gardening for nature, you can both create an incredible garden that's open to the public for Norfolk charities on most Sundays during the summer, but also allow wildlife to thrive as well.
And you're right along the Wensum, so you're on that wonderful corridor of wildlife that flows right from the northwest of Norfolk down to beyond from the Broads.
I sort of think, well, often on a morning, if I go out, I might actually can be in a national park within 5 minutes of our house. And often people don't realise that we have a national park coming right the way through the centre of Norwich.
You've touched there on your own garden in the around the cathedral in Norwich. As the leader of the Environment for the Church of England, what is the church, and here we're in a wonderful example of an eco-church which takes great care ecologically of its churchyard. What is the church able to do? You are an enormous landowner across the country, both churchyards and wider land use, farmland. What is the church able to do on its own estate to take great care of the environment and ensure a healthy environment and biodiversity for generations of the future?
Well, the Church of England owns sort of 3 types of land. So parochial church councils, PCCs, have land often around their churches, often churchyards. And as has happened wonderfully here, there's ways of managing churchyards so they can both be places of great tranquility and peace for bereaved people, places for communities to enjoy, but also, I believe, being good for nature. I believe our churchyard shouldn't just be for the dead, but also for the living. And when you allow, with good interpretation, with good community engagement to explain what you're doing, perhaps avoiding the new areas of new grave, but sometimes the older parts of churchyards, allowing the sward to come up, to seed, and then cutting it back in the early autumn and removing everything, which is so crucial so that the nitrogen levels in the soil don't soar. You can actually find the seed bank, because this land largely is quite undisturbed, can create really wonderful habitats. And I always think that if you're mourning, to be in a place where there's bird song and there's wildflowers and butterflies and bees and other dragonflies is so much more enjoyable than something more artificial. So we have churchyards, we have glebe land, which dioceses own, and these are often ancient parcels of land around communities. Often, most of our glebe land in this diocese is tenanted or is looked after for wildlife. Some areas, of course, will come into use for development at some point, or for social housing, particularly when they're within a village envelope. And that helps to fund the charity and to resource the church today. And then there's the national land that the church commissioners own, which is often the very ancient estates of bishops and abbots that has been consolidated. Some of it goes back centuries in the ownership of the church. All of it is tenanted, and so we've worked with generations of the same farming families as tenants of this land. And another part of it is forested to conservation status forestry, but it's providing timber resource for the UK market, but also with riparian strips and the right level of broadleaf species and leaving raptor posts when you fell, it enables a much more sustainable type of environment. So the Church of England's heavily involved. We take a great care in the land we have. We always say to people that it needs to be stewarded well. What we pray and what we believe must also be in our actions and how we look after this land that we are the temporary custodians of.
And is there ever a situation in which those of you who are involved in thinking about biodiversity and the environment in the church, feel a need to guide more strongly with regard to churchyards, with regard to farmlands, with every respect to the farming families who've lived on the land for generations? Is there a feeling now that the time has come to become greener as a church?
I think that what I'm seeing is that in a very positive way. So I'm seeing so many more churches becoming eco-churches, which is a fantastic scheme run by a Christian conservation organisation called Usher UK, and they are taking this very seriously as part of Christian discipleship. And we're also seeing the work that the church commissioners are doing around their real assets, and there's a suite of new videos just been produced. You can find them if you put into Google Church Commissioners Real Assets on our farming estates, on our forestry, and on our development land, as to what we're doing to try to do things more in tandem with nature. We've entered into a number of partnerships with wildlife trusts to manage some of our rarer habitat areas, working with tenant farmers to learn through organisations like FWAG and to peer learn. Because I always think a tenant farmer sees their grandson or granddaughter playing with a toy tractor in the yard, knowing that hopefully this farm will pass to them one day. And I think 90% of our tenant farmers on the Church Commissioners Estate are reporting increased biodiversity. They're very much on the page with it. And it's that balance, isn't it? We've always got to be balancing how we grow food, particularly in the current geopolitical situation we're in, how we grow food, how we grow timber, but how we do that in parallel and tandem with nature. And I actually believe that when you do things well for nature, you generally do things pretty well for business, and you also do things really well for human beings. And when we can try and get that harmony of each of those areas flourishing, I think that then becomes a really good stewarding of the land.
We have exactly the same in my work at Norfolk Wildlife Trust, that my colleagues who work with farmers, with landowners, they frequently say to me that now there's a generation of farmers who see exactly that model, who see that nature is what gives the land its richness, and therefore enables an economic model that keeps feeding us and keeps us happy and healthy.
We will all go hungry if we lose the bees. The pollinators that have so declined. When you look at the figures over my lifetime, the loss of hedgerows, the loss of insects, you just need to go on a journey and remember back in the 70s when you would wash your car windscreen repeatedly on a long journey. And now it may now be the aerodynamics of our car windscreens, but you don't do that nearly as much now, which is terrible. The loss in terms of biodiversity all around us is a huge worry. And if we lose our pollinators, we're really stuck.
Really in a mess. Have any of you come across a report called State of Nature, which is it's put together by around 60 nature conservation charities, academic institutions, and it's been produced every few years for the last few years, and it gives us a feeling of how biodiversity is coping in the UK. And as Bishop Graham is saying, the losses over the last 100 years have been quite phenomenal. So it's high time that we, as people who have the power to effect change, are doing so that future generations can live with the same biodiversity that we've had the blessing of living alongside.
Of course, some of this has come about because of changes to agricultural policy. There were times when you could be paid for removing your hedgerows. I think what I'm seeing increasingly as I get involved as a very new parliamentarian is the unseen consequences of legislation and how we join up some of these things. There's a great organisation called Peers for the Planet who send me briefings ahead of every debate, and they're really smart because they can see in a bill that's coming through you think it's got nothing whatsoever to do with nature, where there might be an implication. And so how do we nature-proof all the legislation that's coming through Parliament, I think is a really important thing to be doing.
Thank you. And my next question was touching on that very thing of your role in Parliament. But let's step on from that when you invited me kindly to visit you in Norwich, you had just been to Colombia. You'd just been to the COP. Would you like to tell us a little about what the church hopes to do, can do, is doing on a broader scale for the environment, our shared environment around the planet?
Yeah, well, the Anglican Communion, the Anglican Church, is part of the Anglican Communion. So this church here in Holt is not an isolated church. It's part of the Diocese of Norwich. It's part of the Church of England. But it's also part of the Anglican Communion. So sisters and brothers in Christ all around the world, we have a sense of connection. And many of our colleagues around the world are already living with the daily impact of climate change and biodiversity loss. They are often in countries that cannot afford mitigation or adaptation, and when disasters happen, they have profound impacts on communities. And so the Anglican Communion takes a very great interest in environmental issues. I was asked to lead a very small delegation to COP16 in Cali, and I said, look, I want it to be more women than men. I want it to be more young people than older people. I want indigenous people. And so there were 6 of us in total. I was the oldest, which was great, because usually I'm the youngest in the church situation. And we had this amazing woman from Tonga, a young woman, we had a young woman from El Salvador who's an environmental activist. They brought so much. I learned so much from them. And we were involved within the COP in a whole variety of ways. Quite a few things with the sort of faith pavilion, multi-faith groups, but also meeting government ministers and delegations. I spoke at an event with finance ministers from around the world, actually talking about a phrase in the Lord's Prayer: give us today our daily bread. Jesus didn't teach us to give us a Greg's stall every day. Just give us today our daily bread. What is enough? What is sufficient? How can we tread gently on the earth with having enough? What is enough? And when is enough enough? So I hope in small ways we were able to make some contributions, and the voice of faith communities with potentially about 85% of the world's population belonging to a faith community has a profound ability to bring about the change of hearts and minds, and to think about how we tread more gently on this single island planet home that we share in the great company of creatures.
You've very, very nicely queued up my next question, which is...
If I knew what they were.
Yeah, it is. You're 2 ahead, in fact. This is going to go very fast, I'm afraid.
When we speak longer.
The next question was specifically about the Anglican Communion and whether there's an equivalent role in every church in the Anglican Communion as head of biodiversity and environment or similar.
No, absolutely, and I think we're seeing most of the leadership for this at the moment coming from Africa. The Anglican Church in Kenya has pledged to plant 15 million trees before 2027. I visited Tanzania, where in my previous diocese in Worcester, we were linked with the Diocese of Morogoro, and most of the churches we went to on our visit had tree nurseries. I also went to our other linked diocese of Peru, where most of the churches had hutches in the back of them for guinea pigs, because it was a way of earning money for the church. Father Howard, no guinea pigs here, I don't think. But there is I think we've got a lot to learn from the global south about engaging with these things. I nicked a little idea that I heard about amongst some African bishops about giving a tree to everyone who's confirmed. So in this diocese, if you are confirmed in this diocese, you're all welcome. If you're not being confirmed, to be confirmed, because I give you a hazel tree. And why a hazel tree? Well, in the centre of Norwich, Mother Julian sat with a hazelnut or something like a hazelnut in the palm of her hand and saw something in that moment of the wonder and the joy and the creativity of God. And so I give a hazelnut to people to say, go and plant it somewhere and watch it grow as your faith grows, but also so that one day, hopefully, you can sit under it and shell hazelnuts with future generations. And that's an idea I nicked from Africa. And I was on a call the other day with the Archbishop of Kenya, and he was saying how, I can't quite remember the number, but he'd given out huge numbers of trees last year, because he gives them at baptisms, weddings, funerals, confirmations, anything and everything. He will give a tree for people to go and plant, because he thinks that is the most important thing. And, I think it was which theologian was it who said that if the world was to end tomorrow, I'd go and plant a tree.
Thank you, Bishop Graham. Now, staying in the global south and the countries from which you're learning, and we all have so much to learn about custodianship of the environment. It is many countries in the global south that are at the sharp end of the environmental crisis into which we're heading. And I took this from the Church of England website. We believe that responding to the climate crisis is an essential part of our responsibility to safeguard God's creation and achieve a just world. Climate change hits hardest the poorest countries and poorest people of the world. Meantime, the widespread destruction of the natural world is a crisis for creation. And from your own book, The Way Under Our Feet, available from Bishop Graham at the end, as of 2018, there were 68.5 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, according to figures published by the United Nations Refugee Agency. That's about 1 in every 111 people alive today. 1 person every 2 seconds of every day is being forced to flee their homes because of conflict or persecution. Of these, 40 million are internally displaced people in their own country. 25.4 million are refugees and 3.1 million are seeking asylum. 85% of refugees are being hosted in developing countries where, despite their hosts' poverty, generosity is found. And later in the same passage, behind the statistics are unique and precious fellow human beings who are afraid, hopeful, desperate, and sometimes joyfully safe. It strikes me that in the Church of England's historic custodianship of its flock in the UK and across the world in the Anglican Communion, we're now at a crossroads where custodianship of the environment is not just something we do for its own sake because nature is beautiful and is our home and our birthright in God's creation, but also because we have a profound moral obligation to protect those who suffer most. And in fact, they are the ones who will pay most dearly for the climate crisis that we have engendered, largely in the global north.
I totally agree. And what we see is when there's environmental degradation, climate change, we see people moving or fighting more over scarcer resources, particularly water, moving to other places, which leads to community tensions, which can lead to war, which leads to migration. And we see this, you see this on all the maps of the migration flows. So the fact that we have decided to reduce our overseas development budget with really no consultation, and I for one believe we should be increasing defence spending at the moment. I think we are in an incredibly dangerous place. I was at a defence briefing yesterday afternoon and it is frightening. But we've raided a pot that in many places is doing a lot of good to future-proof us. to try and build resilience in communities amongst the poorest nations of the world. I'm sure it could always be spent better, but there is something about this country's commitment to overseas development aid which is vitally important, and it leads to a safer world. So many of the issues we face at the moment, which so often become populist issues, have their roots in environmental concerns. And that's why I think we have to tackle some of how we're engaging with the environmental issues of our day to lead to a more peaceable future. Because it's not just the world's poorest people who are most affected. Our unknown great-great-grandchildren are not going to have the type of life that we have enjoyed. And some of the predictions of what that could look like are terrifying. If we break planetary boundaries and reach tipping points, if the temperature goes in the direction it seems to be going at the moment, because we're not taking enough seriousness about what the science is saying to us, the great parts of the world are not going to be inhabitable, and there'll be ever more fighting over the world's scarcest resources. Why is Trump interested in Ukraine? About minerals. And it's the first time we've ever had a sense that you've got to provide something for me before we'll help you when you're under attack. I had it really has hit me. A week last Monday, or 2 weeks last Monday, the third anniversary of the invasion, I went and spent the evening at the Santa range at outside Thetford, where the Irish Guards are training Ukrainian conscripts on a 5-week course. And it was very, very moving spending that evening with them and a service. And I have these little holding crosses from Bethlehem made from olive wood. And I gave each of these 200 or so men and women a holding cross each into each of their hands. And the fear in their eyes was extraordinary. And, we live in very, very dangerous times. And we seem to be living in a great shift in geopolitics, where it's about having, putting me first, America first, whatever. Having as much of the pie as I can possibly have for me, now. Not thinking about our global responsibilities, not thinking about our responsibilities for future generations.
Would you be disposed at this point, Bishop Graham, to take a couple of questions? Yes. Sure. We'll get to that in a second. Peter, can I ask you to bob up with a microphone? Or various people are running. Biddy is running, Bev's running. We're going to be overrun with microphones. But before we do that, may I lighten the mood? What have you seen in nature in the last few days that has brought joy to your heart, your eyes, your senses, your ears?
Well, I saw an advert for one of our garden opening days. It was a beautifully designed advert, to come to Bishop's House Garden this summer and spend the afternoon. And it was wonderful because it had pictures of the garden and it had a picture of a monarch butterfly. First recording in Norfolk.
Now that is testament to the work you have been doing in the Bishop's Garden to improve it for biodiversity. Congratulations.
The other evening, I was just having a wander, and a hedgehog was out, probably from its, because we've just had this warm spell. It all scurried back away again. But it was out and about, and amazing those hedgehogs that, because they've got such sort of tiny legs, but they go at great lick of speed. So, it was kind of made me chuckle, really.
Hedgehogs are designed to make people chuckle. If you've never heard a hedgehog eating, or worse still, mating, I encourage you to experience this. And isn't there enormous beauty in the thought that your stunning cathedral, we are so lucky in Norfolk to have the Anglican Cathedral in Norwich, it has been there for 900 and odd years, and those self-same hedgehogs and their genes have flowed through that plot of land through that entire time.
So we also have monkjack, which I'm not quite so...
Less so. They're a parvenu. Anyway, we have microphones circulating. Do we have any questions at this juncture? We'll take a couple now. You're all very shy. Oh no, you're not shy at all. Bev, would you reach for the hand that's there closest to you? And then Biddy perhaps will come a bit further forward next.
Yeah, this is Mark Albrook, Chair of Chroma Green Spaces. And this year we've identified as the Year of the Bee, and we are trying to do everything we can to raise awareness about the importance of bees and just how much we depend upon them. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your love of bees, please, Bishop.
Well, I keep bees, and I'm a bit sad because I had 4 hives and I've come out of the winter with 2. So that's a bit of a shame, but that's partly beekeeping, and you have the joys and the sorrows of that. I had a look last week, and there's plenty of stores, so they've not starved. So I just don't know quite what's happened there. And I find it immensely relaxing because I have to put in my diary bee inspection time. The diary is just so ridiculous at times. I have to put in as an appointment to myself and I have to put in a couple within a couple of days because one day might be rainy or miserable and you need a good weather day. And I go down the garden and I have a very relaxing time, and I'm sorry to admit it, but I talk to my bees. And it's actually, I find it a very prayerful activity. When the late Queen died, I went and told the bees, which is a kind of beekeeper tradition. And I don't know, I found that very cathartic. And I don't particularly enjoy honey very much, but I love producing it and then giving it away. And when you say this is from my bees, I did a visit with the former Archbishop of Canterbury to Rome, so I took a jar of honey to Pope Francis, from the bees in the garden.
How very lovely. Before we get to the next question, is there a metaphor in your beekeeping for the tending of your human flock, the care and the devotion you have to put into it?
Yeah, I think so. I also notice if I'm stressed and a bit clumsy, that's the times I've been stung. I've got a really good bee suit now. I was kind of swelling up more and more every time I got stung. So last year I didn't get stung at all. So hopefully the same this year. But if you're gentle, the bees are so much. There's a gentleness. You can get a horrid queen where all the bees are pretty. You open the top, they come straight at you. But generally, I've had quite nice placid queens latterly, and when you're gentle with them, there's a sort of gentleness back.
But that's the case with our relationship with many animals, isn't it? My godfather's here, who's a farmer. My father and aunt are here, who are both horse people, and people who live around animals understand that what you give to them in terms of energy, for want of a better word, is what you get back from them. There's a reading of them. There was another question somewhere up here, this gentleman here.
Yes, you touched on the church's estate and how you were trying to influence that in becoming more environmental with your tenants. Obviously, the church has a massive pension fund as well. Is there a similar theme going on there with an ethical and environmental investment policy going on within that?
Yeah, we've divested now from all oil, gas, coal, tar, sand. We have very strict ethical safeguards within both the pension fund and also the church commissioners' equities. And so ESG is a very major part. So, environment, social and governance are a very major part of all our investing. And sometimes we'll get that wrong. You know, there was the classic case of the Archbishop of Canterbury, you know, saying how terrible payday lenders and Wonga were, and then, blow me, so journalists discovered there was £50,000 invested somewhere in Wonga. So, you know, that when you take these principled stands, you've got to be really careful. But it comes out again as, you know, what I believe, what I pray, I want to act on as well. And I'll get that wrong at times. But, you know, if we can try to ensure that our investments are aligned with those principles, I think it's really important. We went through a period of time, actually, when we were still investing in oil and gas. So we were trying to influence the boardrooms with some success around the transition to net zero and around aligning with the Paris Agreement. And there was a lot of good work that was done with that, with a number of other major investment houses through a Transition 100 group that the Church Commission has set up. And that was very positive in what it was done, but sadly, the independent assessments that were being done about all these companies we had investments in was that they were just not aligning. And, you know, part of the strategy was that if they would not align after a certain period of time, we would then withdraw. But, you know, those shares don't disappear. Those shares get bought up by people who want more drilling. So we were trying as a shareholder to bring motions to annual general meetings and to try to invest as part of a big, I think it was the Transition 100 group in the end had about 30 trillion in assets. So when you combined with a whole lot of other, you know, the Environment Agency Pension Fund was all part of that and things. You know, when you combine that, you can have quite a voice. But the reality was that the oil and gas companies were greenwashing and were just simply not making the transition that needs to happen to get us aligned with the Paris Agreement.
Duncan has his hand up. We'll go to Duncan, and then we'll have more chance for questions later. Although I see there's lots of interest, so we may have to contain you to a certain extent, or be here all night, Bishop Graham.
As long as I get my walk.
Graham, thank you. I sat on the Environmental Committee for 5 years in Parliament. What you've just now said about the Paris Climate Agreement, I think, is incredibly important. We've got a leader of the free world, we've hardly heard anything about it, who has pulled out of it. The US is now on a par with lovely places like Libya, Yemen and Iran as the only countries in the world not signed up to it. He's going to drill, baby, drill, as he tells us, and doesn't give a stuff about the environment. In this country, we are now going to home building program for many, many years. Pulling out of the Climate Paris Agreement is incredibly worrying. We seem to, in 5 years, have gone backwards, not forwards, in protecting the environment and nature. Your thoughts on that, please?
No, I think it's gone right down the agenda, and some of the leadership that was shown by people in your party, you know, people like Alok Sharma and Goldsmith,
Zach
Goldsmith. They were real leaders in this area, and I still take part in debates with them in the Lords, and they are incredibly passionate and incredibly knowledgeable about this stuff. So I do want to give the Conservative Party credit for the leadership that happened during part of that period. And at the moment, it does not seem to be nearly high enough. You know, Ed Miliband seems to be doing a lot of the thing, but the Treasury seems to have such a lot of control at the moment. And I am worried that it has slipped down the agenda, and it's starting to be seen as a woke issue, and it's starting to be seen as oh, impossible, why? I get people saying to me, why on earth is the Church of England investing in solar panels on its roofs and air source heat pumps and, doing this sort of thing, when China builds another, coal fire station every week, or whatever the figure is. I don't know what the accurate figure is. But, I say it's actually about moral leadership and thought leadership, and actually setting a pace and a vision for where we want to be. We don't give up. We keep on. So please, Duncan would be the first to tell you, they're often influenced by, MPs are often influenced by their postback. So, please keep writing, particularly to Labour MPs. If you've got a Liberal Democrat here, but if in other parts of Norfolk, write to MPs, write to the Prime Minister. If you feel passionately about this, and ask. I'm putting in regular questions. One of the things I'm able to do is put in written questions, all the time to ministers. I put in loads of environmental questions because it gets printed in the House of Lords Daily Bulletin. They have to reply within, I think it's 10 working days, and the replies are public. And it's to keep it on the agenda, keep it saying this is important. We mustn't forget it. So if you feel passionate about that, please write to your MP and raise it, because MPs do respond to what's in their postbag.
Poor Jerome Mayhew is sick to death of my long letters, I regret. Always long handwritten letters, but to his enormous credit, he has responded, met me, discussed at great length, so well done him.
Duncan always impressed me whenever I did letters to all the MPs in the Diocese of Norwich. I think there were 10 constituencies. I always get a reply from Duncan's office. That's not the case with other places.
You've queued up, Duncan, you've queued up my next question, which is about what I might call doctrinal resistance within the Christian community, because as you've both touched on, we now have a leader of the free world who is drilling baby drill, and for whom the environment seems to have no importance whatsoever. And he is supported by tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of Christian people for whom development is an article of faith. And I wonder how we approach that schism, for want of a better word, within the church, where the Church of England and the Anglican Communion are working towards a more just world environmentally and socially, and other churches are leading in the opposite direction.
Well, I think in the situation in the States, it's the Christian right that's the real worry. And they have, this is probably to paraphrase too much, but their whole theology is based on the fact God's given us this stuff, let's use it. The sooner it's all used up, the sooner the second coming will come, and God will restore everything anyway. So that's the kind of narrative of belief. And I think it's really grotty theology. And we need to be pushing back on that all the time, and saying that actually there is something much more profound and about our sense of care for God's creation as being a key part of our life as Christians. And I'm starting to see it in some places within the Church of England, and that's a great sadness. That there's some pushback on some of the environmental work we're doing. We should be focused on something else, or we should be focused on mission. Well, actually, I think it's really missional to be involved in the environment and in issues of justice, because I actually think it's something that's incredibly attractive to people, particularly the young. And one of the things I desperately pray for is that we grow younger as a church. That's not to say we don't continue to have older members of our congregation. It's just I'd love to see some younger members as well, and to look after these amazing buildings, to keep them prayed in generations to come. And And when what we're seeing is that when churches are really engaged with the environment, actually they are attracting new people to be part of it.
Thank you. In your book, The Way Under Our Feet, you make a point of Jesus's ecological literacy. You write, Jesus was also deeply concerned to the land he walked and the soil beneath his feet. He knew what it was to cope with the heat of the day and to shiver in the cold of the night. He observed the plants that withered under the scorching sun, the lilies, the choking thistles, the size of the mustard bushes, the lack of fruit on a fig tree, and the grain in the fields ready to be winnowed in the hand and eaten on a Sabbath journey. It's a bit of an obvious question, forgive me, but it seems to me that in your understanding of Jesus and his ministry, he would be leading on this issue because it is fundamentally an issue of justice.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think I write far too long sentences, by the way, when you read them.
I think he writes rather lovely sentences. And
I do think, because theologically, Christ is Lord of all creation, and holds together in the beautiful hymn at the beginning of the letter to the Colossians. There's a wonderful hymn from the early church that's kind of been slotted into the text, which speaks about this connectivity of the whole world. And so I think it is a profoundly Christological area to be involved with. And one of the things I think about Jesus is he was so attentive to all around him. And as I read the Gospels, I keep coming across this attentiveness. Attentiveness to the leper, to the woman that's hemorrhaging, to the woman who touches the hem of his garment, reaches out, that attention. The book I'm writing at the moment, I think you know, Nick, is about Gilbert White, the 18th century priest naturalist. It's kind of partly because I see myself in some ways like a very different sort of life than Gilbert White had. And the thing about Gilbert White is he kept extensive records till 1793 when he died. And these records have about 10,000 entries in them of what he observes, all sorts of things from the date the swallows came and the crocuses blew, which means flower. He said the word then for flowering was to blow, and all sorts of amazing things. And Farmer Johnson delivers a cart of dung for my melon bed or whatever, and he talks about watching narrowly, and he was able to make all those connections. As probably really our first ecologist in this country, that then became the letters that he wrote to Penneton, to Barrington, that formed the natural history of Selborne. And this watching narrowly enabled him to make all kinds of connections and come up with some of the first theories around ecology. And yet, today's world, we are so unattentive. We're going like this all the time. We've moved nature onto a screen. Sometimes it can be useful because you can identify if you've got the right app, the bird song or the wildflower. But our attention has shortened so much. And what I think a life of prayer does for you is to prolong that sense of attention, of waiting, of watching. And I think there is something wonderful about rekindling a desire to just really take in a bud that's about to burst, or to watch a bird, just to be still from time to time and watch nature. I think we're then in the company of Jesus.
I may have said to you before that at our Norfolk Wildlife Trust Foxley Wood Reserve we have, it is glorious, glorious, and it is at least 1,000 years old, having been mentioned in Doomsday. But it was in the 1960s largely sprayed with Agent Orange and converted to a conifer plantation. And when it came into the care of Norfolk Wildlife Trust in the 1990s, the late 80s and the early 1990s, we gradually removed the conifers and nurtured it back to being a broad-leaved wood. And we knew that we had succeeded when we read the diaries of the 18th century Vicar of Ling, who, like Gilbert White, was a great naturalist, and every single flower he noted in his diary has returned to Foxley Wood, and so we have the same, a beautiful record.
I had an hour and a half yesterday with Patrick Barker, who Nick kindly put us in touch with each other. What a joy. It was just a fantastic hour and a half. And I hadn't realised his father had really been heavily involved in saving Foxley Wood.
Indeed.
And when I've ever been there, and if you go at sort of height of butterfly season, it takes me back to my childhood with the number of butterflies see there. It's just, what a treasure that is. Yet we don't value it enough. You know, we can put a price on everything, but a value on nothing almost. And you know, the value of that is beyond measure.
I leap out of bed every day at the moment and walk just upriver, and there's a pair of kingfishers courting. And I regret that I disturb them every morning in their courtship. But
you should be the bishop of sex.
I should indeed, or for kingfisher sex at least. But it is the moment, the most. My day is then as bright and blue and joyful as a kingfisher's rump. It is the most exquisite thing. And yesterday, shortly thereafter, I bumped into an otter, which is the most beautiful. I live on the same river as you do, but considerably further upstream. At this point, with only one or two questions left in my quiver, I think if Bishop Graham is disposed, we'll take some more from... Can we get people... The lady here in the very front row. Have we got... Bev, would you mind bringing a microphone to the lady right here in the front? Thank you, Biddy.
Hello there. Mine's a more light-hearted question. Do you ever get the chance to do the gardening yourself?
Yeah, I do, actually. Yeah. No, I love, I really enjoy gardening. My predecessor, so when I arrived, the head gardener at the time had just got a new job because he convinced himself that the new bishop would not be interested in gardening. And he'd been head gardener for 25 years at Simon and had done an amazing job. And I think he was a bit disappointed when he actually discovered that I really enjoy it. So I try and do a little bit. It's partly his time, but we keep the gates closed until about 7 o'clock because I have been known to be out in my jammies.
There are drones these days, No, thank you for that question. There's a gentleman who's been behind the pulpit, and I've been ignoring his question. I do apologise.
As someone who enjoys walking in the beautiful Norfolk countryside, what's your view about covering large areas of the Norfolk countryside in solar panels?
I would prefer to see the solar panels on the roofs of factories, on the roofs of every new house being built. Why is it that we don't have a planning regulation that every new house has to have solar on it? Just why? Why is that not the case? I'm really glad that we're getting some solar panels on some of our churches. So, Peter Bancroft Church in the city centre now has solar panels on. In September I was asked to go and dedicate them, so I went all the way up, dedicated these solar panels, came back down, 2 police officers in the church. What's been happening here? because some lovely member of the public had reported that there was a youth stealing the lead. So I'm really glad, actually, that a member of the public is looking out, because lead stealing from our medieval churches is a major issue. But, King's College, Cambridge has now had permission and got installed solar panels. We're getting solar panels on one of the one of the cloister roofs in Norwich Cathedral. That's not visible from the ground, but it's about saying this is important. So, where it's, I don't particularly like seeing solar panels, particularly where they're on prime agricultural land or could damage rare habitats. But there are also the schemes where grazing can happen in collaboration. And, it's interesting. I haven't got a full answer. I think I prefer to see them on some of our buildings rather than on land.
Can I just lodge that Holland are going to build solar panels on road networks?
Nice.
We've got miles of road networks. So if you could just
Did you say Holland? Did you say the Netherlands are going to build? Yeah.
solar panels on road networks.
Ample use of space, indeed. Since you touch on the eccentricity, perhaps, of blessing solar panels on St Peter Mancroft, would you tell us just for a moment about your role as, is it Abbot of St Benet's?
Yes. Yeah, no, so St Benet's Abbey in the Norfolk Broads apparently was never properly dissolved by Henry VIII, and the abbot was amalgamated with the bishopric. And so I have this very quirky thing that I'm the only bishop and abbot in the Church of England. My monastery, though, sadly, is a rather romantic ruin in which, of course, that landscape was all created to burn peat, which is now in the atmosphere. And then it had one of our first sort of net zero windmills put into it, using natural resources to create energy. And I go once a year. It's a wonderful day. It's the last Sunday in July each year. I sail on a wonderful wherry and get looked after really well. And we sail there, and there's an ecumenical service that a few hundred people turn up to. It's wonderful, so 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the last Sunday of July. And then we sail back. And sometimes it can take forever if there's no wind.
But you can presumably also be watching bitterns and marsh harriers and perhaps even late swallowtail butterflies as you go along the river. How marvellous. Let's pass 2 more questions. Do we have another hand? Bev, there's a lady, I believe a lady, excuse me, right beside you there.
Hi, we've talked a little bit about farmers and landowners as being so important for nature on their land. And policy for farming is really tough at the moment with inheritance tax, agricultural property relief, and the sustainable farming incentive going yesterday. What's the role of the church in supporting farmers who feel angry and stressed and suicidal? And I think both, what's the role at the parish level, but also your role in the Lords?
So most Sundays I'm in a different parish in the diocese. I've got 658 churches. Many of our rural churches, it's farming communities that, people who are the church wardens or, doing the teas and coffees or helping some way. So we're really, parish churches are really hefted to the landscape and are connected. This Lent, every year I have a Bishop's Lent appeal. This year it's for an amazing Norfolk charity called Yana, You Are Not Alone, which works around mental health support. What we're hoping is that this Lent appeal will raise enough money to be able to extend their phone line for emergency calls, because the suicide rate amongst farmers is far too high. our farming communities used to have much more people on the land, working on the land, a sense of community. Now often a farmer may not see anybody else in their working day. And as you say, there are these huge stresses. So I made myself very unpopular with the government by being pretty gobby about the inheritance tax in a debate in the Lords. You can look on Hansard and see what I said. But I just think it is a wrong attack, and it's an urban attack on rural communities. And I have heard through getting some case studies through the Royal Norfolk Agricultural Association, I heard of a family in South Norfolk where the farmer has not passed on to the son and is dying, has advanced cancer, and feels he needs to die before this time next year, or his son will have to sell the farm. That is wrong. And I think if there are other ways that could have been done to avoid the huge human toil on farmers of this policy change. And I will play my part as much as I can in the Lords. Whether I'll be heard or not, I don't know. But there's, I also heard that DEFRA did not know about this change until the night before. And the DEFRA ministers did not know. And it was the Treasury that was pushing it through. So again, it's where the power of the Treasury at the moment, I am quite concerned about.
Another question. Shall we come to...
So you always thought that bishops were left-wing, and Duncan would have always told me that bishops in the House of Lords were always against the Tory policies. But the government in power always says that the bishops aren't supporting. Because our role is to try and enhance legislation and to try to bring a perspective from our local communities.
Yes, nice to see you. Question for you. Obviously, you've got a lot of authority within the Church of England at the moment. Going forward, if you were in a more powerful position, is there anything within the Church of England that you would like to change? Or if you had 3 wishes, what they could do better?
What an exciting question. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I am staying in Norfolk. And I am really...
That's not a disappointment, I think.
I'm really clear about that because I have a strong sense of calling to be here. And I don't have any sense of calling for any other job that might be vacant at the moment. But if I could make any change, it would be, first of all, to really value our parishes. The parishes are the backbone of the Church of England. When parish ministry is done really well, it contributes to the life of each of our communities. And it contributes in a wonderful way. And we've really got to value that. We've got to be the safest church we possibly can for children and vulnerable adults. Now, this has been a very, very painful time, not least for survivors of abuse. I do absolutely believe we are the safest we have ever been. But we must never be complacent, and there's always more to do. And that has been a priority for me in this diocese, and it will continue to be a priority. And the third thing, I'd love to recapture the imagination of the English people about the joy of the gospel. Because I believe that the gospel is about joy and hope and love. And I'd love to rekindle that real sense of the joy I find in it, that others might find light in darkness, that might become generators of light and manufacturers of salt in their communities.
Another question. A gentleman down in the other side. Bev, a long way from you. Biddy, you're probably...
Yeah.
Oh, Bev's running. Thank you, Bev, very much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. You've mentioned trips that you've made to Africa and to South America, and I think you also mentioned the Middle East. How do you square the environmental impact of all that travel with the environmental beliefs you hold?
Good question. Because it is something I take very seriously, and so, our holidays are not, they're in this country or on the continent, and they don't involve flying. And when I do have to fly, I do the offsetting through an organisation called Christian Stewards, which plants trees. Now, I know that is not at all ideal, and I do a lot of things online around the world, so that I'm not travelling there. I've just been asked to do something in Assisi, and I've turned it down because I won't go to Assisi for 2 days to do a half-hour presentation that I could that I can do online. So you rightly challenge me on this. I try to be very selective about what I do, where it is more essential, because there's also something incredible about human relationships and getting to know people and building relationships and trust, which can't be done on Zoom to nearly as good an effect. But you're right to challenge me on that.
Do we have one more question? Because I'm sure you're all anxious to meet, there's a hand there, we'll come to you, Tim, in a second. I'm sure you're all anxious to meet Bishop Graham and ask him questions in person as you buy his book. But Tim, there's a hand up there.
It's on commission. I wish he'd brought his book on geese, because it is the most fantastic book.
Oh, bless you.
If you've not read Nick's book on geese in Norfolk, it is a joyous read, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you. So, Tim, do you put your hand up, please, so Bev knows. Oh, you've got a mic, have you? Yeah, if you would.
Bishop Graham, you spoke earlier about the church estate, and I'd just like to take us back for a moment to rural churchyards. And I live in a village where I'm in the fortunate position of being involved in running a small village nature reserve, in effect. And I've tried, along with other volunteers, to promote the idea of how can we encourage biodiversity across the village as a whole, and to widen it from the particular site that we have, which is owned by the parish council. And what I find is that sometimes I'm told that we've got enough biodiversity there, we don't need it anywhere else in the village. And the churchyard is sometimes an example of what you could almost call having a scorched earth policy in regard to its management. And I just wonder, how does the church convey down to the grassroots level, where you have volunteers who are looking after the estate, what the ideal policy might be, so that they might be more aware of opportunities to promote biodiversity and find that balance that is needed between the tidiness, the respect for the graves that people attending, but also finding opportunities within that area to have an area where nature can get on with its own thing rather more.
Thank you. So if churches are signed up to work on becoming an eco-church, it's part of the criteria for that. So they need to be thinking about environment. There's lots of resources on the environment pages of the Church of England website, I think on the Darson website as well. There's resources to help you think this through and support you. There's also some fantastic organisations like Caring for God's Acre, which is a Christian organisation that supports biodiversity in churchyards. So there's lots of resources there. Again, it's about hearts and minds, and so I hope there's 150 people here tonight that you might have a conversation or get involved with your local churchyard to see how it can be enhanced, or part of it can be enhanced, for biodiversity in nature. we've all got to pass the message on and see what we could do. Mown churchyards are fairly recent, from when we had lawnmowers. What happened before that was that the farmer would probably bring a flock of sheep in twice a year and sort it out, and so it's become very fashionable. And I had a lovely reunion a few months ago with somebody I was really friendly with at school when we were about 9, 10, and we were going to be explorers to the Antarctic. Anyway, he now works for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and where Commonwealth War Graves, as you know, are immaculately, beautifully kept. There's a stereotype of what is respectful for the dead. And he is head of horticulture and is looking at how, very sensitively, Commonwealth War Graves can be cared for much more, both for the dead and for the environment. Huge amounts of chemicals are used to keep those lawns looking so immaculate, to keep the weeds at bay. Now, how could we have almost a national conversation about what is respectful, what is right, for some of these sorts of landscapes or protected places, graveyards that we have? And I believe, certainly for churchyards, it needs those local conversations, because I know that where it's been introduced in this diocese, there can be angry of so-and-so writing to the EDP about how disrespectful it is to have uncut grass. Well, it's how do we work with our communities to explain what we're wanting to achieve and to do, and then to do it sensitively and bring people on a journey. I think that's crucial.
Thank you all for your questions. Thank you, Bishop Graham. I feel I should say that should you still wish to pursue a career as an Antarctic explorer, we do have a very eminent one in the audience this evening, a professor of the British Antarctic Survey, and I would be delighted to make an introduction if that avenue is still one that you see ahead of you. Bishop Graham, I have one last question. It's in the nature of bishops to be hopeful for the next life. But as a scientist, I wonder how hopeful you are for life on this precious planet that we call home.
Life on Earth will go on, and life will keep evolving, but I don't have huge hope for the human species, who seem intent on killing each other and harming future generations. I mentioned earlier that I've been in Cali for the COP16, and I came away very, very despondent that we were not stepping up to the mark that we need to. But the end of the Bible is the kind of science fiction part of the Bible, as I sometimes say, the book of Revelation. And there's a wonderful verse in the book of Revelation: the leaves of the trees will be for the healing of the nations. Go and plant trees. That will bring you hope and the world hope.
I know that Biddy's about to say a word of thanks, but I can't finish without saying my thanks. Thank you to all of you for supporting Felbeck Trust, for being here this evening and for listening so attentively and offering your questions. Thank you to the community of this wonderful church in Holt for being so welcoming to all of us. And Bishop Graham, thank you very, very much indeed.
And thank you for being here.
Oh, follow that. I have to say that I don't think there is one person here tonight who will not go away with many, many thoughts that have been provoked, not only by our very gracious Bishop, but also by Nick's very insightful questioning. Their conversation flowed as I think it has done in the past, and I'm very interested in many, many of the answers to the questions. Events like this don't just happen. They happen because people believe in something, whether it be believe in the Lord and our church, whether it be a belief in the commitment to nature, whether it is a belief that the Felbeck Trust is actually going to really make a difference to some of the plots of land that it has. I believe the Trust has totally fulfilled its objectives tonight in bringing to you a wonderful conversation. But thanks are due to Father Howard and his team, to the church wardens, to all the people that served you your drinks and your cake, which I hope you partook of very, very liberally. And I will say that there is a need for churches like this to continue to have donations. And to that effect, we have put 2 baskets at the back of the church, which, if you do feel so moved, would be very, very welcome. You'll also find on your pews the yellow envelopes, so if you are somebody who can engage in gift aid, that would also be very, very welcome. And of course, Mark is at the back of the hall with a book that looks like this. £10? Absolute bargain. So I hope many of you will purchase that. Our thanks are to all of you for coming, for attending. As Nick said, he says such a lot. He's just wonderful. Thank you. I would like to thank you, but I would also like to say that my own interest is poetry, and your last words about hope reminded me of Emily Dickinson, who said, "Hope is the thing with feathers." And I think if we can take away the image of a small bird visiting Emily Dickinson in her room, we will take away something that will enable us to walk gently on the paths. Bishop Graham, Nick, thank you so much. And in your applause, which I know is coming, please take away the thoughts how we can sustain the wonderful earth, the county of Norfolk, the place that we live, and the environment that we are able to enjoy. Thank you all very much indeed.
He's always a hoot.